This is our final in a series of 3 videos that we did with Joe Curtis and Ron Gallagher regarding the history of Piper's Opera House and some of the history of the surrounding areas of Virginia City. We were filming this along with another group who was going to be live streaming this presentation, and all of us had technical difficulties with our equipment, and some may attribute it to ghosts and some may not. You'll have to wait and see.
Hi, again.
Good evening.
Good evening. Are they really not going to have a light on, you guys?
Don't know.
It's going to be awful dark.
Yes, it's going to be awful dark. There should be some kind of. Oh, those lights will be on.
So, as Stephen said, this is Professor Curtis, and I mean that quite literally. And I get to provide a little color commentary. I'm a native, but I'm a loose leaf notebook, so I really am never too sure where I'll wander. He's got a real course of action, so stay with me. I know you'll stay with him. First thing, we both have been teachers in one way or another, and of course, if you stand up in front of a group, you have to have rules. Our rule is that there is no rule. If you have to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. If you want a drink, for God's sake, go back and get it. We'll hope it's because you're entertained, not because you're bored. But just go get it.
If you want another one, go get in.
Go get it. Yep. That's as I say, those are the only rules that we have. One other note that we make, and Joe and I have had the opportunity to do this a few times. In one of the presentations, the word BS was there'd be some BS. Now, you all think you know what that stands for.
That's science. Amen.
Stands for, with my Irish background, it stands for Blarney shots. Blarney shots, and you will get a lot of them tonight. And the definition of a Blarney shot is quite simply that it's information that's presented in an interesting way, preferably with a smile, and it's received with a smile. So, as we go through tonight, please enjoy the Blarney shots. As I said, I'm the color commentator, so to get us started tonight, just to get in the mood, we're going to step back in time. And I'm looking at a very mature audience. We're all at least middle age. I've just gotten to that point. But it means that, it really does mean that we don't have to have a phone in front of us with a screen to imagine things. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the next couple of, Joe needs it. Yeah. You'll have a screen up there in a minute, but use your imagination, because what we'd like to do to just kind of get in the mood, as I say, is step back in time. And it is February 4th, 1879. Are you there? Good. It's good audience. 1879. So I want to welcome you all to Piper's Opera House. And just reminisce for a bit that it was only 3 short years ago that we would have been standing in rubble after that fire of 75. And look at what we have tonight. If you haven't had a chance to wander all through the Opera House, please do so. We have Mr. Piper's personal assistant, Whitney, is in the back room, back by the bar, and she's ready to take care of any of your needs back there.
Many years ago, just a quick side
Yeah,
story. Many years ago, when I sat on the Piper's board, which I do again now, got sucked into that. And we were having a board meeting up on the stage one time. It got to be about 9 o'clock. We were kind of finishing up, and all these weird noises started, weird noises started happening in the building here. And it really startled us all, because we really didn't know what was going on. We checked the doors, and we checked to see if the wind was blowing, and nothing. And it was, and I'm not into this ghosty kind of stuff much at all. And so we looked around, and I remembered something my mother always used to tell me. She said, because they had a building in town here that she said there was problems with. She always said, well, if that sort of happens, just tell them to shut up, leave you alone, you'll be done in a couple of minutes, and you'll be out of their way. And so we did that, and it all stopped. And to this day, I have no idea what that was all about. But we terminated the meeting pretty quickly and left.
Uh-huh. Yes. I think I'm a little more of a believer now.
Not really.
So let me just, as we step back again to 1879, I would like to welcome specifically 3 groups to the Opera House tonight. One, the residents of Virginia City and Gold Hill, and at least there's no snow tonight, so the walk wasn't too bad, and hopefully you were able to stop at a variety of the places along the way for a libation and stay warm. I would also like to thank the people that came up on the V&T Railroad from Reno and Carson. I know that took some planning, and I know you'll be staying the night either at Friends or at the International or one of our other really wonderful hotels. So thank you for coming up. But I'd specifically like to thank a group that came up for the first time ever that this group was able to come up in the manner that it arrived. And those are the folks from Sutro and Dayton. And they came up through the new Sutro Tunnel. I am looking forward, and so is Joe, to talking to them about that voyage, if you want to call it that, because they got to the Sutro Tunnel, and then they got on buggies, but the buggies were pulled by mules, and they were pulled on the tracks, the same tracks. The buggies had the ore cart wheels on them. So that almost 4 miles, I hope, was a smooth trip for them. I'm particularly interested to hear about their journey up 1,600 feet in the cage for the first time, for most of them, and see what they thought about that. I'm also looking forward to talking to those folks when we go down to Sutro one of these days and find out what they're going to think about the trip down 1,600 feet in that cage. Coming up may have been okay. Going down, fascinating. But we'll talk about that when we go across to the International for dinner. And that's part of your entry fee, by the way, libations and dinner at the International Hotel. Want to note that it won't be quite as extensive as the Christmas dinner. There were 66 items for you folks that weren't aware of that. The banquet that they had for Christmas just a month and a half ago, 66 different items were on the menu. And you have to see the menu to believe the variety that they had. You won't get all 66 tonight, but the quality will be just as good as Christmas. So, and we'll be wandering around talking to you and make sure that everything is okay. Also, I want to just recommend very quickly that when you go over to the International, if you haven't been through that marvelous hotel, which is only a couple of years old now, be sure you wander around and check out the 6 floors, check out the 140-something rooms that are there, the parlors, smoking parlors, goes on and on and on. This modern technology. We're better off back in 1879. We wouldn't have that problem right now. And didn't have it coming up to Sutro either. With that said, check out the all steam heat, oh, by the way, across the way. All hot and cold running water, 27 different areas to take care of any needs that you might have, and that's on every floor. So if you're wandering around, if you have a need, you will have hot and cold running water in those rooms.
Keep talking.
That's That's hard for an old Irish guy to do, but I got a few other things that I could share. Yeah, there were 20 washrooms and closets and an elevator. If you haven't been on an elevator, you folks that came up from Sutro have been on an elevator, a 1,600-foot one. And as I say, we want to hear about that story. With that, is modern technology with us, or?
I won't move forward. I don't understand why. It won't go to the next slide. I have no idea.
You know, I'm okay for an Irish guy, but I don't know if I can handle an hour of me just rambling on while you're screwing around.
Mike, where's Sherry when I need her?
Try throwing it online and see if we can make that work.
Well, it worked fine. It just like the sound over here. Everything worked fine until you.
Oh, things are happening. Things are
I can't get
happening
it
in
to
here.
move forward. I don't know why.
Well, anyway, if we reminisce for a minute, if we're still in 1879, can you imagine? Oh, okay. That must mean that, Joe, I will keep my comments in reserve just in case this thing flops again. Are we ready?
I think so.
Then we'll turn it over to Mr. Curtis, and we will do some did you knows about this marvelous, marvelous city that we're in here today. And thank you all for coming, by the way. It's lovely to look out at a group that's interested and paying attention. And oh, the one thing I didn't mention in the little introduction was, if you have any questions, be sure you ask them. If you don't hear something and want it repeated, we can do that. If there are any really difficult questions, they go to the professor, they don't go to the loose leaf network. Are you ready?
I guess I'm ready. I don't know about the computer, but I'm ready. Excuse me. It's really fun to see all you guys here tonight, and it's kind of odd because we haven't done these things for over a year now, well over a year, because all the time before we could see who was here. Now we don't know who is here, who dislikes us, who likes us, who wants to get rid of us, and that sort of thing. So I'm really pleased that all you folks are here tonight, because this is a fun thing for us, and it's totally interactive. And as Ron said, we'll throw this stuff out. If you've got a comment to make about something, raise your hand and make that comment. And if it takes us down a rabbit trail, we'll go down that rabbit trail and we'll move on to the next place. And we'll have more fun with it. So when you got here, 1879, you came up, whichever way Ron said you came up here, you were probably wondering about the prior history of the Piper's Opera House, and when it was, at that time, was known as McGuire's Opera House. And McGuire's Opera House, which is what this picture is, was McGuire's Opera House, and inside, and this was on D Street, behind the Bucket of Blood, on the east side of D Street. So when you would have gone there, this stage would be facing back towards D Street, and you'd be sitting, and this was an inclined room, a kind of a amphitheater type of format. So you would walk down like you normally see in a lot of places today that you go for presentations and so forth. One of the things that's really interesting about this particular photograph, and again I say it's McGuire's, so it predates actually Piper's Opera House, is that the gentleman on the far right-hand side, it's a little difficult to see here, but when you take this thing and put it into things like Photoshop and some other type of programs like that, where you can really zoom in and look at that, you can actually see features and so forth. And it's obvious that is an African-American gentleman who obviously was apparently involved as a stagehand, I would say, more than likely. From there, I have no information about who he was or who any of these people were. But they actually would have taken that picture pretty early. And you have to think back, these photographs, you think about these photographs and you'll see some of these that are just stunningly clear. And the camera, essentially, the camera goes way back into the initial ones, into the 1700s, but the camera like we know it today was pretty much invented and became came in use in the 1850s. So if we're only 20 years into the development of cameras and so forth. So as we go through some of these pictures of being here at Piper's, you'll see that some of them are really clear and clean. And it's just amazing how they developed that technology. That is so clear on your TV and in different locations, and it was almost that, almost that clear in some of these photographs. Let's see if it'll move forward for me. Hallelujah. I have no idea why that's happening like that. If anybody else does in the audience, maybe, oh, here comes Clay. Oh, my salvation. Oh. Okay. This is, everybody knows, you older folks, like Bruce Larson and so forth, knows what a stereo card is. And then that's another thing. I like to mess with the guys I know in the audience. So it's fun. We have some people in the audience that are pretty much natives to the Comstock and know a lot of this stuff that we know. And one of the things that's important, that I find important, is every time we do one of these presentations, I learn something. So I am actually utilizing this opportunity to suck information out of you guys too, because you all know little other things and little pieces. So if you know something, or if you hear something you think is, well, it seems to me I heard a different story or heard this. Let us know, because we like to compare those things, and it didn't work play. So this is a picture of Piper's Opera House, roughly this 1879 period. And I wonder if that cord is, we got the cordage there.
No guarantees.
So, okay, no guarantees.
Don't go too far.
Step on the cord. So this is when the balcony, of course, was on Piper's Opera House, and this is done to me before, but this was, and it's a picture. You see how Union Street goes up and continues on up to A Street, excuse me, and had that nice walkway on the side and so forth. And of course, it doesn't do that today. But Piper's was, I mean, that street was often very full of people. This is another view of Piper's at that time. Of course, the copy of it that I got was damaged. And I have gone back and I have altered, and I've actually taken all that and cleared it all up, and I've got pictures at home that I fixed that to make them look normal. But this is actually an old photograph or a scan of this actual photograph. A lot of these things, I have the original hard copy photographs that I've collected. I collected these things since I was about 10. I've just always been fascinated by them. So another view of Piper's that you'll see, and we're going to go through several views. This one is roughly in the late 20s or early 30s of Piper's as it begins to deteriorate. And if you see on the, let's see, I think this thing will work. If you see on the door right here, the corner door, that of course is no longer functional, but it's still there. And that was really the primary entrance for the corner bar that was there at that time. Now, of course, it's in the front area. But you can read in a lot of old historical material that relates to people going into the corner bar, and they'll make reference to where the door was on the north or the south side of Piper's. Here's a one taken in the 1930s, and you can continue to see how the deterioration of Piper's occurs. Well, you know, Piper's was the major, a major focal point in the community for entertainment. For the last couple of years, I've been working on a project with a fellow many of you probably know by the name of Ron James. And he and I have been involved deeply in the retranscription of the Alf Doten journals. Alf Doten was the editor of the Gold Hill News from the 1860s up into about 1890 something, and close to the turn of the century. And in that, there's a lot of references. If many of you may have seen the 3-volume set of Alf Doten's journals and read part of them, and they were put out by the University of Nevada and transcribed and put into operation by a man by the name of Walter Van Tilburg Clark, who actually lived down on Taylor Street, down behind Catholic Church. Well, unfortunately, when they put that together, they only put in those 3 volumes approximately 50% of the information that was actually in those handwritten diaries. And over time, they realized, the University of Nevada Special Collections, who asked us to do this, they realized that they tried to get other people to help, but nobody could understand the vernacular that it was written in, and it's all handwritten in pencil in actual little diary books. And so we're taking the diary book and looking at it, and they didn't understand the who they were talking about, who was being referred to in certain things, what was occurring. There was so it ended up Ron and I pretty much doing most all the transcriptions, and it amazed me how much more information there was in those diaries about things like Piper's Opera House and the National Guard Armory that was on C Street. That there was so much further information in there that when these are going to be able to be accessed on the internet, possibly within a year now. We're getting pretty close to the end of it, but there's just massive information. So Alf Doten talks a lot about what was going on in Piper's Opera House and all of the various acts and so forth. And he refers to them as circuses. And there were circuses that came in here and played. And they involved wild animals. They would have man versus bear fights. They'd have boxing matches. They'd have roller skating events in here. And in later years, they played basketball in here. The floor that you're on now is a floor actually that was put in here by a movie company many years back that needed to have quiet rubberized flooring so that when they moved their cameras around on their rollers, it would be quiet. It was we're looking at some opportunities to take this all up and refinish the floors back to normal. But if you take this up, you will see that on the floor, and I think there's a picture in here that you'll see it.
There is, because I checked it out, because my dad actually played on this court, and another person, interrupting you for a second, that played here was a fellow by the name of Jake Lawler. Lawler Event Center. Lawler was a teacher, coach up here in the 1930s, and when the National Guard Armory was busy, town team ball, some high school ball, but also town team ball was played up here. As Joe said, I know he's got a picture where you can see the free throw circle. And I'm so old, I didn't play there. Heck darn.
When you played here, they didn't have the free throw.
They didn't have basketball when I was prior to that. But it is fascinating to be able to look at the original floor and see that there is a basketball court in here. And as I say, Jake was up here for several years and then went on to greater fame and glory at the university. Can I add one other thing as you look at Joe's pictures, particularly of the Opera House, and he'll show you some on C Street. It's testimony to the survivability of Virginia City. From those first pictures you looked at with this marvelous new building, which had been replaced a couple of times, and then you see it deteriorate. There was a delightful lady here, Alice Byrne, and she had grown up here, and she loved the Opera House. And when I was a kid, which was a long time ago, I'll grant you that, she would sit on the summer days down at the entrance with a little cash box and charge people 25 cents to come up and look through the Opera House. And all of that money went into a hopper that would hopefully take care of a window or a door or something that had been broken. But that was her passion. And if you look at the survivability of this building from where it was to where it is now, and it's regaining that's really indication of places like the Fourth Ward School, St. Mary's Hospital, et cetera, that there were people who cared, and by God, they're still surviving.
There were real people here. I mean, we see pictures of them, but these are real people with real lives, with real kids, with real wives, with lives of employment in so many different areas. And for example, Mike Nevin's grandparents were here very early and were miners in the area, and his dad was as well, worked in the area. You probably, some of the others have relatives here and so forth. This is a photograph that takes into about the 1930s, and you can see there's no paved streets, and now it's all leveled out and so forth out in front there and so forth. But this picture actually of Piper's is taken after 1914 after the International Hotel burned in October, I think it was October 11th of 1914. And later on, so what you're looking at here is the right in here, if you can see this. This is kind of a shed or building. This was built in the area of what is now the Bucket of Blood parking lot. And if we move forward, no, that's the wrong forward. This shows you that there are real people here. And this is an ice cream social that was actually being held. And so you see all the ladies in the front row and all the men in the back, and they all obviously posed for this picture. And you see this old boy here, he's got a plate of ice cream or cake or whatever it is that he's eating right here. The ladies have stuff on their lap. This lady here has got a plate of whatever they were serving at the time. And that was very popular to do that and to have events here and so forth. They also had these kinds of events in the Armory Hall. And I think actually, in reality, this photograph here was actually taken in the Armory Hall, which was on C Street. But it just to illustrate that this kind of stuff occurred here. Here's the kind of people that appeared in Piper's Opera House. Faye Templeton. I'm not sure, other than Ron would remember her. But,
I only got to talk to her for a few minutes, but I do remember her much.
Yeah, I think he tried to date her, in fact. No offense to you.
I was too
It's
old.
okay. She should have kept him.
So Faye Templeton was a dancer and singer, and she appeared here quite often. This other gentleman, Mr. N.C. Goodwin, he was a Shakespearean actor, and he appeared here on a regular basis. And it's amazing. There were some of the shows that are documented in Alf Doten's journals is quite amazing. Lily Langtry, we've all heard of Lily Langtry in one thing or another, but that's Lily, and then she appeared here. Don't read the signs above the doors. Don't read those and believe everything that is on there about who presented here and who visited here. Because in the 1950s, that was to generate tourism. There was a lot of names. There was a lot of them that are correct, but there's a number of names on there that were put on there to get people's attention, to make it feel like, wow, I'm here with, so-and-so was here and so forth, but not being the case. The other lady here is, oh golly, I forgot to put her name on there. Maud Adams. I think it was Maud, no, was it Maud Adams? Maybe not. Somebody knows?
It's in Nevada.
That's right, you're right, it's in Nevada, you're right, that's right.
Joe will take all the help he can get, please.
Yeah, absolutely,
Help.
yeah. I was in a hurry. I was working most of the day, and so I was in the last-minute mode of trying to make sure everything was together before I had to come up here. So here's that door, that infamous door to the corner bar. that was there. So this is a view from just the corner of the courthouse. There's the courthouse is here on your left. And actually that's in the early 30s. It's really good when you see that because you can date them by the cars that are in there and Pipers, and you can see how it's just deteriorating so fast. And right here, you see the chimney right here is falling down. And you see this cupola on top here? It's a vent, actually. And if you turn around and look, made you look. If you look up at the ceiling, you can see the hole in the ceiling, and that goes up through that cupola. And if you go up in there, it had to do. What I found out is basically it had to do to let the cigar and cigarettes and pipe smoke exit the building, because it would be, according to Alfred Doten, this room would become inundated with cigar smoke. So if you're sitting here in 1879, you're sitting here in the middle of this horrendous cigar smoke, because everybody smoked cigars. You look at the pictures and you see up and down C Street, and even on the B Street, you see all of these pictures of these places that are cigar stores, cigar bars, cigar stores, and so forth. So you go up there, and it's sort of like a barrel that has no ends on it. And you go upstairs and you look at the staves, and there's a bunch of names that people have written on there and put the date and so forth on there. And it's much like if you've ever been in the Gold Hill Depot, B&T Depot in Gold Hill, you see this graffiti names. Even in the depot up here, you see graffiti names of people that worked for the railroad and so forth. So, me being who I am, many years ago, I was volunteering time in here to help run all the conduit in the attic for all the new electrical and so forth. And I was noticing all their names up there. So I thought, why shouldn't my name be up there? So most of them were done in pencil and so forth. And people who worked in the building and what have you. So I put my name on it up there too. That would have been in about the 80s, early 80s, 1980s, let me clarify.
You don't go back as far as I do.
Thank God. So I put my name up there, and I thought, in 50, 75 years, people are going to go up there and they're going to be looking at that and they're going to go, I wonder who this guy was. I wonder what he did. Why was he up here? And so forth, So that's why every sign I do for people in town, I always put my name on it, so I'll be famous someday, So let's go on. So Ron was talking about how in the 50s there were these tourists and so forth that would come in here, and this is probably taken in the early 50s or 40s possibly. And this particular thing it's called an oleo, and this still exists, but it was taken down and it's rolled up and it's in the back here, and it's in serious need of restoration, which will be in the neighborhood of $100,000. But it exists, and you can see all of those things on there. As a hobby, and the thing I like to do is I like to duplicate some of the signage that was here originally in Virginia City, and I've got a whole bunch of it that I duplicated. And so I did, which one was it? I did, the Crosby Company up on top up there, right up here on top. The Crosby Company. I duplicated the sign to look just exactly like that advertisement is. It's a canvas-based oil, like an oil paint covered, and it's all hand painted and all hand done. I also did one of E.J. Dwyer and Company, and I thought about trying to reproduce every single one of these one time when I don't have anything else to do. So I'll probably never get it done. This is more like in the 50s when you would see Thrasher was a postcard guy, and so this was about done in the 1950s. And when they had it open, and then there was Louise Driggs would open this thing up for tourism and so forth. And she had it all set up like this, and you could go in and watch, and she'd give you a tour and so forth.
That's the one, can we see the basketball? Yes.
Is it? Yeah. If
you can see the
right down
free
here
throw
at the bottom,
circle.
you see a little line under that piano?
Yep.
and a portion of that of the free throw circle right here, around there. And so apparently somehow or other they had a basketball net rigged up here somehow or other, I'm sure.
And it was a full court. It was not a full court in terms of footage, but the other basket was down by the door, so, and it wasn't quite as wide as, but by God, it was a basketball court, and they did play here.
And you can see here that, see the condition of the inside of the place now, as opposed to the condition that it is now. It's a lot of work has gone into it, fortunately, and it's looking pretty good. So, kind of as an example, we're thinking Saturday, April 10th is one point of information that I came across. It was a stormy morning. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. It was a very lively snow, but the snow was melting pretty quickly, as we see it do here. Senor Boseo, with his sleight of hand performance and an illusionist, etc., and gift distribution performance, opened at Piper's Opera House. That's a quote out of the Alf Doten journals. They were here for 3 nights. It was a touring group that were here for 3 nights. When Alf Doten went to this particular event, he didn't get home till 2 in the morning, because he always talks about how this was a packed house, or it was a slim house, depending upon what it was. There was a big snowstorm. It's a big snowstorm. It was about an inch on the snow on the ground. Yeah. But think about an inch of snow, what that meant to a horse and wagon, the problems that would have, or even just walking home, because he lived in Gold Hill. So they walked from here to there, or he got a wagon from the Eclipse stables, which was on the divide. He'd walk up from his house in Gold Hill, which was just a little bit above the Gold Hill Hotel on the east side of the road. And he would walk up. Sometimes they'd catch the 6 o'clock train from Gold Hill up to BC, and they would ride up that way. And they always referred to it as they would catch a car, referring to a railroad car, and they would catch that and go up and come up the hill.
Didn't he give the weather every day?
Every day he gave the weather.
So we know what the weather was?
Yeah. And so some of you that, I know Mike and Steve probably sees it as well. I don't know. And I every day I send the weather information out to all the county employees and so forth, and other people who want to be on the distribution list. So we send that out, and I very often will put down what the weather was on that same exact day. So like recently we had this big storm, and I put the weather down for that same period of time when I sent the weather out to everyone as to what we are, because I have to reinterpret the weather, because Reno Weather Service is great, but their weather reports are based on Reno and Carson and Douglas, and so we have to know. And it's kind of just having been around here long enough to be able to know if they say it's going to do this, well, it's going to do this on the Comstock, and Bruce knows how that works, of course, so you have to reinterpret the weather. But if anybody else wants to get on that distribution list about how the weather works, but it's fun because I'll do Diginos on there because it gets attention. So I'll do some Diginos, little blurbs and so forth. I've got about 260 little historical Diginos on there.
They're not little, folks. They're not little.
Where Ron and I were thinking about putting some kind of little booklet together with all these Diginos in there and throw in some photographs and stuff, and see if we can make enough money to buy gas to get back and forth up to DC. So he, about an inch of snow on the ground, with lots more coming, and he got to bed at 3:30. As it goes on from this point, it talks about the next day they ended up with about 12 inches of snow, and and this is in April. Bear in mind, they're in April. So. Here's another guy, Edwin Booth, and he was a performer a dramatic performer that performed here, and had also had some involvement with the management at one time of Piper's Opera House. It's my understanding, and I don't know if it's true or not. It's my understanding, and from what I've been to pick up, that he had some relationship to John Wilkes Booth. I think he might have been a brother or a cousin, from what I've been able to pick up. Did I say what? It was a brother. Okay, all right. See, this is the kind of affirmation that we get back from these groups, and I love it because it becomes a discussion that we have. You know, I don't claim to know everything about all this stuff. I've got a lot of pictures that help to illustrate all this stuff, about 3,000 of them, I guess. And it's just fun to get a whole bunch of historians together and start BSing about all this stuff. There's a little billboard type of thing. It's about 20 inches across and maybe 8 inches high. It was an advertisement for Opera's House, Thursday, November 17th. It just announced that there was an event going on here. It didn't say what it was. But here's a typical one of the contracts. This is the top portion of a contract of a group that was going to work, that was going to appear here at Piper's. And this is actually dated about 1889, 1890. And so it was Charles H. Yale's The Evil Eye, many merry mishaps of Nid, and the weird, wonderful wanderings of Nod. You know, as those of you that had fairy tales and stuff as kids, you remember Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod? You know, that's what my wife calls me when I'm in the recliner. Mostly Nod.
Calls them some other things too.
The thing that fascinates me is the quality of the color and the printing capability of 1890, 1900. So then as we back away a little bit from Piper's itself, and we start looking at B Street, we go, well, what was on either side of this? And what happened on B Street in this general area? Well, as we look to the north, we see that just immediately to our north is still standing is the Miners Union Hall. And the Miners Union Hall is quite interesting because it truly was a union of the miners, of the working men, miners and millmen and so forth. And they had formal unions and had parades like we have on a Labor Day kind of thing. They had formal parades with banners and all dressed up, and it looked like something out of New York City, you know. And so now this is one interesting thing. Here's an interesting thing about this building. If you notice up here at the very top, what does that look like to you? I mean, it's obviously a symbol of some sort. It was a sign of some sort. But what does it look like to you? A what? I did hear a beehive. Yeah, that's what it was. It's a beehive. And now, so the next portion of that question is why would there be something up there that looks like or could be an insignia that would be a beehive? Why would there be a reference to a beehive?
Worker bees.
Worker bees is one, but at the time this was built, the date that this building was built, was Nevada a state? No. What was it a territory of? Utah. What is Utah all about? Right? Utah is all about the beehive insignia. That's on their flag and their license plates and their foreheads and everything else. So I thought to myself, I want to recreate that. So if you look at it today, it's been all recreated and redone, and on the this thing has been put back. It's actually a piece of tin that's set into the brick, and so it's all been redone. If you look at it during the day, next time you go by, look up there at it, and it's done in gold paint. That I was able to determine that by scraping some other things away, that it was a gold paint sort of material. Metallic kind of paint. So it was redone and re-put up in there and so forth. And so yes, it's a worker bee thing. It has to do with that workers concept and so forth. But,
Joe, I know you also were telling me about the fact that there was a marvelous library in there.
Yes.
And that, by the way, that building was a powerhouse building when you look at the influence the miners had, just to keep their $4 a day, folks. $4 a day.
And keep in mind that those guys, these miners that were here, the mining operation, the miners' union and so forth, was responsible for some of the earliest mining law in the nation. William Sharon championed mining legislation. So that building still stands and is in excellent condition. And actually, there's the library that Ron referred to. A good portion of those books are now down at the Fourth Ward School up in the attic. And if you open them up, it says property of the Virginia City Miners Union. There was also a miners union building and functional union in Gold Hill. And that miners union hall was located where, just right close to the tracks, by right where the fire department memorial is for Liberty Engine Company Fire Department. It was right there with it on the other side of the tracks there. So if you came to Piper's tonight, where are you going to stay until you go home tomorrow? Because you got to stay overnight, because there's no trains tonight. I'm sorry. The last train left at 9 o'clock, and you didn't have a ticket for it. So now you've got directly across the street is the International Hotel, and that was a magnificent location. Thing. Now there is. I'm personally only aware of 2 actual artifacts that came out of that hotel that can be tracked back to establish the validity of their being there. One is actually the register for the International Hotel. And that's in the property of an individual who lives in Carson. There's an old family from Virginia City, and they have possession of the International Hotel's register book, which has the names of many very famous people, including, for example, Mark Twain, who was Samuel Clemens at that time. And the other artifact, and I have, this came from, originally came from the Marx family, who was longtime residents here in the Comstock. The hotel burned on October 11th of 1914. And so my parents got a hold of this sign from Bill and Margaret Marx. And I don't know if you can really see it very well.
I'm here to help you.
It's tin, and it says entrance to the restaurant. And interestingly enough, it was in the kitchen for the restaurant that the fire started that burned the International Hotel down. So somebody asked me today exactly, I was mentioning it to them, and they said, well, where's that been all these years? And I said, well, for the last 40, it's been on my wall in the living room.
Yes, before
Only
you
2?
first get to it. Well, I got more, but 2. That International Hotel is just fascinating. And of course, it was rebuilt, and it's just a shame that it's not here. But when you go down to C Street, that's where they had the cigar shop, the Chop House. First day that it opened, before the hotel was open, they sold 2,000 oysters. 2,000 oysters. You stop and think, 2,000 oysters from which coast, whatever.
I think it was the Carson River.
Carson River. Yeah. Actually, it was probably Sucrose Pond. But that's just fascinating. But that's the kind of money. And the poor people said, well, if the rich people do it, we're going to do it too. And that's why, as a kid around here, which was a long time ago, you could find oyster shells all over Virginia City. They were just thrown out of where there were houses, and of course they were gone. But anyway, I always liked the thought that there were 2,000 oysters. The others, when it burned, that I like, you're an old fireman. When they built that building, they built it to stand forever, and they put flat cable in the walls. So when the building burned, it was a terrible, well, it was just waiting a disaster to collapse, but they couldn't get it to collapse. They actually had to dynamite the south wall down along the street because the cables were holding up the first couple of stories.
So here's the morning after it burned.
Yes.
And if you look, that big blank wall that's there now is the blank wall that's the site of Grandma's Fudge, right? So that wall is still standing. The upstairs portion is the Oddfellows Hall upstairs, and this is actually, incidentally, this is the 50th year of business for Grandma's Fudge. But they have a newer fudge now.
What was it before it was Grandma's Fudge? Hey, who said that? Okay, you get 50 points. Yeah, it was a movie theater with a sloped walkway down and a stage. And if you were young, and it might have been in the late 40s, early 50s, that's where you went. Abe and Earl Evans had the big projector going up above as you walked in. There was an entranceway with a ticket counter when you walked in, and you got to watch Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, News of the Week with the music. Oh, you young people don't remember that, but that was just, it was a movie theater for many, many, many years.
You know that those projectors are still there?
Are they really?
They're still there up above. When you walk in, there's kind of a landing there that you're coming in. But if you go up into that attic, there's kind of a false wall there, and you go up inside there, and those projectors are still there. Mike, have you ever been in there and saw those?
Well, I remember Betty Lyons, I think worked there, Ron, maybe?
Yeah, Betty and Kelly Lyons, a little bit of early 50 history. They're the ones that came in and started the Visitors Bureau. And I can't remember if they went there first. They went there first, and then they went up, or vice versa, to Paul Coryell's drugstore. But they came in, and it was donations only. And another quick bit of trivia: all of these people, my folks, were here for 100 years. But who comes in and realizes that tourists want to go through a tunnel? Kelly Lyons, out on the truck route. He's the first one that opened it up, and you could go in and walk back about 200 feet. Hugh Gallagher was one of the first guides in the summer when he wasn't teaching. So there's a bit of trivia. But Kelly and Betty started the Visitors Bureau.
And I don't know if you remember, Mike, or if you'd ever seen. There was a fire there. Bruce probably remembers about that. There was a fire in the next door to the theater there and so forth. And I've got a picture of the fire truck. It was the old Ford Army truck that was there. And it's a Delbert's on the side of the truck working the pumps and so forth on that thing for the fire. It says it burned down, and the story is that it started in the kitchen. It was a Chinese guy that had started the fires about 5:30 in the morning to get the wood burning stoves to cook the breakfast and so forth for the residents, and went off to do something else and left the door open to get the airflow and so forth, and sparks jumped out and started the fires.
Took all of the original furniture, which had never been sold, and it was all oak, marble top dressers, beveled mirrors. I don't know if we had nothing left but the furniture that was in that building today, what it would be worth would be staggering.
Oh, yeah, and this just kind of illustrates. Here's Piper's here. Can everybody see the red button? Okay. Yeah. So here's Piper's here, and here's the International, and then here's another one that many people don't really know about, the Frederick's House, which was mainly a boarding house, a kind of apartment-y sort of thing. But the International and Piper's. So I show you this to show that look at the structures that are all along B Street on the east side and on the west side. And then we have C Street here going down and D Street over here. And the point being is, and up over here is the courthouse, right up here, and is that look at the amount of structures and businesses and residences and so forth that occurred all along here. If you look at, there's a mapping system called Sanborn fire maps, and it's an insurance map is what it is. And it'll tell you what a lot of these places were. They'll tell you it's a boarding house, it's a storefront, or what have you. But the point being here is just look at this is A Street up here, and this photograph is roughly about 1886, right along in there, and it's just amazing. So
B Street, Joe, was the main street.
At that time, B Street was the main street.
And the $1 Million Walk and Corby's house, but it was built by Graves.
Yeah, Graves
B Street was the main street for many, many years.
All the parades were held on B Street, and they went from north to south. Was the standard thing. I've got a number of pictures. In fact, I think there's one that we'll show here. Is a picture of going north to south is a parade on B Street. It's in the courthouse north parking lot right here. This was F. Klein's harness shop. This was one half of it. There's two of them that run this together. There was Jacob and Frederick Klein. And Frederick and Jacob Klein had this harness and livery, and were like the original franchisers, I guess you could say, because they also had harness and livery stables. There was two others along C Street. There's one in the 200 block of South C Street, another one in the 300 block of South C Street. There was another one on the Divide. There was another one down in Gold Hill. And they were all owned by Jacob and Frederick Klein. And when I saw this picture some time back, I started looking into it, looking in my directories and so forth to see if I could find it. And they lived behind this, so they would have lived kind of where the cottage is now, right up here behind us. They lived behind their harness shop. So what is interesting is you think, okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's a harness shop, and it was owned by Mr. Klein, and so forth. But I give you that other information about where they lived to illustrate that, remember, these are real people that lived here. These are not just buildings that we're looking at. There was life amongst all of this stuff. Another quick shot of a picture of the courthouse in the early 20s. Interesting that whoever this was, I hope he might have been going to the Justice Court for a ticket for DUI because he's parked on the sidewalk. So, here's another one. It's a stereo card that was taken by Carlton Watkins, and this dates about 1886, 83 to 86, along in that area when Carlton Watkins came through and took numerous pictures in stereo cards. So. This is a picture I threw into John over there, that the courthouse, front of the courthouse, and the National Guard's all lined up in front of there. Which particular unit it is, I don't know. I think it might be the Washington Guard is the best I got, because I have some pictures of some members of Washington Guard that have hats similar to these. So I think that could be. There was the Washington Guard. There was the Sarsfield Guard, the Emmett Guard, and these were different units. And the interesting thing about them is many of those National Guard units were actually formed as within cultural groups. Like the Sarsfield Guard, for example, was primarily Irish. And then you had other ones that were, one was German-oriented, and so I guess it was sort of like, almost like clubs. But they were functional guard units. They even had cannons. They would form their cannons down on between D and E streets down onto the south end.
My great-grandfather was a member of the Sarsfield Guard. They escorted him after he died in the Yellow Jacket. In 1880, they escorted him on the funeral day to the Gold Hill Depot, and from there he went back to where he had come from, which was Nevada City, and that's where he's buried now. The Sarsfield, those guard companies were big time, and as Joe said, particularly the Irish. Yes.
up and down Washington Street, and a little bit over to the north off of Washington Street, and then to the south also of Washington Street. But this is a parade going north to south on B Street, right in front here. And although you can't see Pipers, because it's, a lot of people call it the Mayor Building, but it's actually technically pronounced Marie. It's a weird spelling. It's M-A-Y-R-E, I think it is. And this was a stock exchange for the most part for the Comstock. Here's the International Hotel down here. So we know this is pre to 1914. This is roughly 1880, late 80s, maybe early 90s. And this is probably, this building here is partially, there's some aspects of it here, but you see how these things, and if you look up on the south end of B Street here, you'll see a couple of houses that still have this step configuration.
Joe, can I throw in one
Absolutely.
on Marie? I always found this fascinating.
I must
While you're fooling around with that thing, I'll tell these folks some stuff. Marie was known as an honest stockbroker, and there were many in Virginia City that had titles, but honest wasn't one of them. But because he was honest, during the 1870s, he was making $1,000 to $1,500 a day. Now, if you translate that and take it times roughly 20, the difference in the dollar then and now, he was doing very, very well. And as I say, he was an honest one, so his reputation was a little different than most.
Whenever we talk about dollars, we always like to remind you that what you have to do is, if something, let's say a horse cost you $30 in 1870s, we'll say. If a horse cost you $30 to buy it, if you want to know how much it costs today, you need to multiply that by 24. So let's just say it costs $3. So if you multiply that by 24, that's roughly today you'd have paid $100 for that item. And if you start looking at relational prices and values, you'll see it's really not out of line, but you can see how the inflationary factors are stayed pretty much the same all the way through. So I think that is all of the slides that we had for tonight, because we wanted to just focus on this immediate area around Pipers and what Pipers was all about and that sort of thing. There are so many other aspects of the history of the Comstock that Ron and I like to address and so forth, and we've done a number of presentations that relate to what happened to all of the old buildings. And I have so many photographs of that, of the mining and industry and so forth, that we've still not outgone. We've done probably maybe 6 different presentations on that and still not got all through all the photographs that I have available to me. It humanizes what this community is all about and where it came from. And that's the kind of stuff that we like to collect, because I've already made a digital collection of most of my photographs and housed them at the Fourth Ward School. And the agreement I made with them is, I'm giving these to you, but you cannot give away any copies of any of these. But you can sell them at a piece, at the price, I put a price on them, said you can sell copies if you want to sell copies, but it's to help pay for Fourth Ward School, or to pay for restoration and maintenance of the school museum. So now, at least I know that there is one place that has another set of copies of these photographs, and maybe if something ever happens.
And since you mentioned the Fourth Ward School, which is near and dear to my heart, there is an archive center at the Fourth Ward School, and Joe's collection of photos are being, chronicled, I guess, and where appropriate, attached to people, if that's the case. So what I'm asking is, if you go through any attics or boxes, or you know anyone that has something related to Virginia City in those early days, we would be more than happy to make a copy. You can keep the original, and if it fits into our archival program where we link people, we just found out that a black boy that graduated, a young fella, in 1886, Joe, was it?
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah, young fella, and all dressed up, and we know there's also a black girl that graduated, but just recently there was a contact made with our curator at the 4th Ward, a black gentleman who's, and the graduating senior was 1886, and then went to San Francisco. So this would be his great-great-great-grandfather. And he is providing the 4th Ward with information that's relative to the black community that was here, and his great-great-great-grandfather was very active in I guess, politics, for want of a better term back then. So things keep surfacing, and we can put more and more pieces together, and it's an absolute fascinating endeavor.
There's a poster that is a huge poster that I acquired actually off of it started out off of eBay, and then I went directly to the guy that was selling the stuff. That came out of Piper's Opera House in the 1950s, and got that, and then we had it mounted to canvas to preserve it and so forth. And so when we get this building restored, well, all this stuff of mine, I think, will probably end up here at Piper's so that it represents Piper's. And I'm going to put the microphone down for a minute, and I'm going to unroll another one here that was of a presentation that was done here at Piper's. And there's another example of this downstairs on the wall, but this I came across.
I hate to handle these precious artifacts.
It's hard to hold it up. It's pretty long. It's in excellent shape, but it's an Uncle Tom's Cabin, and this was Topsy, who was one of the characters. And I have no idea what I know what I paid for this and several others, but I have no idea what the value of the thing might be. So it's the kind of thing that we want to, this is all original, and that we want to put, there's that one, there's this one there's one hanging here that is for advertising an event that occurred here.
They made stuff to last back then. This isn't going to just tear, so to speak.
No.
Thank God for Joe, the professor, but really thank God for his mother, because my mother was born here in 1913, and she really didn't have an appreciation. It was old, so she would throw out, or tell my dad to just get rid of it and give it away, a beveled mirror, oak, whatever kind of dresser. Just get that stuff, and let me get a nice Formica table to put in the kitchen. And that damn hardwood floor, we got to get some of that linoleum and put it down. It's easier to clean. And then I don't know what she would have just gotten rid of in terms of paperwork from the grocery store that had been in the family from 1900. But when she was sewing it out, Joe's mom was realizing the value and saving it. And thank God, because otherwise it would be down at the dump.
One of the next presentations that Ron and I are going to start working on is we want to look at a section of history that has not really been examined at all to any great depth. And oddly enough, is if you stop and think, what is today? This is 2021, right? So it's 2021, and if you go back just to say 1950. That's 70 years ago. That's a long time. You're telling me.
I remember it well.
Yeah, right. You were about 40 then, weren't you? and that's so we're looking at doing something that relates to the 1920s up to say 1959. Because what's important about 1959? What's unusual or important? What happened? Bonanza. And what did Bonanza do to the Comstock? It totally revamped it. It totally is a renaissance, right? It just totally changed the direction. Like Ron likes to say, is that it went from mining gold in the mines to mining gold in the pockets of the tourists. Little things, little bits of history. Here here maybe a year ago, a local fella came over to my house and dropped a big rock in my driveway, and it was pretty good size. Dumped it out from his truck back then, and he said, "Here, John, I wanted to bring this to you." And I go, "What? Yeah, it's a nice rock. Yeah, you know what is it?" And he goes, "It's part of an arastra." And I said, "An arastra, really?" So he rolled it over, and clearly you see the flat side of the rock, and you see these arched scratches into the rock. And an arastra, if you don't know what an arastra is, it's the earliest form of crushing rock. It was used on the Comstock. Apparently, it came from Mexico, and that was popular in Mexico. And it was a large round stone. And who this was Fred Garrett that came over and dropped this off. And he said he had several more of these pieces. But I have it in my garden now, and I have it documented as to what it is. And he said that he got it down at the mouth of 7 Mile Canyon. So Bruce, what was at the mouth of 7 Mile Canyon? Was the golden curry, right? Right, exactly right. And you got that house that came up here. Up on the divide, there's a house that's all rock house. And I remember when they brought that up here, I think it was Kindle's. One of the Kindles was involved with it. And I remember that if you saw those the blocks, they dismantled a block house that was down there, and it had in white. I remember it had the numbering of the block, and they had a schedule of where each of these rocks, and they rebuilt the house up here, up on the divide, and there's people living in it to this day.
Any of you have any good hard questions for Joe? Don't let him off the hook. If you have a question, throw it at him.
Movies shown was shown here in Piper's Opera House in the really early teens period of time. There was one of the first what you think of as a movie, a walking kind of movie that was shown here. Absolutely, but it wasn't like a theater thing. But there was at different times too. Later on in years, we used to have, and I don't remember. It was probably maybe in the 80s or so, 1980s. There was we'd have Friday movies and different things, and there were various over the years. Different people would show different movies in here.
It was probably in the 20s when the sound movies first came in, and they put the theater in, and you walked in and sat in the great chairs, and the stage was down there. As you say, they would catch on fire periodically. Also, I remember that as a kid. The movie would be interrupted while Abe and Earl took the fire extinguisher and squirted out the fire, and had a splice of film back together. You know all about that. Pieces of the curtain.
Yeah,
That's back in the early days, folks.
You see that in the movies where it shows the film going burning out. Like you see it happens in MASH things. I see that all the time.
The McGuire's, I believe this one was built. This is the third iteration. There was McGuire's, and there was one built here prior to the fire, as far as I know, Jim. And most of it burned, and then it was replaced with what Joe had the pictures of. And then there was another fire in the early 1880s, 82, 83. Didn't take the whole building, but it took part of it. But I believe McGuire's was gone and Piper's was here. McGuire's left back in probably the 60s, late 60s maybe.
Yeah, late 60s, right. So your grandkids come to you and they say, "Oh, gee, Grandpa, I've got to run around the track for each time I run on the track. And if you donate $1 for each time I run around the track, we have money for the school and stuff. That was the same thing. The ladies would have these roller skating events, and that's exactly what they did, is they raised money by how many loops around the inside the building here with their roller skates.
Some things don't change.
Yeah, that's true, exactly.
Well, you know what? It's we're oh my goodness.
We're 3 hours no. We're an hour and a half into this, which is about what we usually end up doing. But if there's any other significant questions that anyone has, we'll take a couple more maybe. I think that all the newer people that move into the community, they move here because they like that history. They're fascinated with it. And it's a movement that is gaining power, definitely. And so
And walk through, when you have time and you want to enjoy history, walk through the cemetery, go down to the St. Mary's Hospital, Art Center. If you haven't been there in years, you won't recognize it. I'm particularly partial to the Fourth Ward School. Go up, check out the changing exhibits, check out the archival center. If you haven't been through, Joe was instrumental in this, the Slammer Museum over in the courthouse. If you want an overview of Virginia City and the area as a whole, go through. It's a marvelous, marvelous overview of the Comstock.
So anyway, so thank you all very much for being here tonight. Unless there's, oh, you had another question. I'm sorry. There's so many myths out there about how much population there was, but the peak population of all these numbers that you hear are generally around 20,000. That's not just Virginia City. That is the north end of town, roughly down to Silver City, when you hear this 20,000 thing. So the peak population of Virginia City proper was probably in reality around 18,000.
One more.
One more. Oh,
Yeah.
I knew I shouldn't have invited you.
Point of observation, your pictures of the 1920s and 30s of Pipers shows the corner bar easily. It also shows that target that's up there with all the little light bulbs
Right.
that's still out there.
Right, it is, yeah. They're new bulbs now. But
There are new bulbs.
yeah.
But if you look at it close, it looks like the same old piece of wood.
It is, essentially is.
And that's the on and off as to whether the bar is open or closed.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's been around. That's an interesting observation. And I thank you all very much. And Ron thanks you. And we enjoy this stuff.
Well, thank you, Ron and Joe, for another wonderful evening. And they will be back later this year. We've got a few more dates.